Hello and welcome to session 11, Jerusalem, its origin and early history. One of the areas where Jew and Arab have long been in conflict is the question of sovereignty over Jerusalem. Today, as in the past, Jerusalem is the centre of conflict in the Middle East, as it's a holy place to Jews, Muslims and Christians. The conflicts concerning Jerusalem contrast with the meaning of the name of the city, which is habitation of peace. Will the city ever live up to its name? We can start to try and answer this by examining the history of this city. We are familiar with the general geographic location of the city. Let us examine the city itself. The city is built on a plateau that peaks into a series of hills. There are steep ravines on all sides except the north, and this has assisted in making the city difficult to conquer in the past. The city has two areas of raised ground on the north and south of the city. To the south is a ridge that is Mount Zion, which became known as the City of David. At the western end of this ridge is thought to be the site of Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified. Having gained some idea of the city itself, we now go back to the first book of the Bible to look at some early references to the area that became the Jerusalem that we know. In Genesis 14 and verse 18 we read, "Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High. And he blessed him," that's Abraham, "and said, Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth." Now here we are introduced to a Bible character called Melchizedek. And he's described as king of Salem, and Salem is the city of Jerusalem. Melchizedek is described as a priest of the Most High God, which shows us that from earliest times, Jerusalem was a place which stood out from the places around it as being a special place of worship of God. In fact, both Jewish and Arab traditions place Jerusalem in the area where the Garden of Eden was situated. We go on a few chapters in Genesis to the time when Abraham was commanded by God to sacrifice his son Isaac. In Genesis 22 and verse 1 we read, "Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. Then he said, Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." So Abraham was commanded to go to the land of Moriah, to a mountain that God would show him. The place that he went to was one of the hills that Jerusalem is founded on. Mount Moriah is in Jerusalem and is the mount on which the Dome of the Rock, the Mosque of Omar, is built. And this shows us a major reason why the question of the sovereignty of Jerusalem is seemingly impossible to solve in the long term. It contains one site that is holy to both Jew and Arab. The record in Genesis 22 tells us that Abraham, on receiving this commandment from God, went with the full cooperation of Isaac to Mount Moriah. He had the knife in his hand ready to kill Isaac when God commanded him to stop. God then provided a ram for sacrifice rather than see the death of Isaac. Abraham was ready to sacrifice Isaac because he had complete faith in God that he would raise Isaac from the dead. Now this was a severe test of the belief of Abraham in God, as Isaac had been born when Abraham and his wife Sarah were well past the age when they could normally have had children. The New Testament shows Abraham as an example of a man of faith because he believed totally in God. Time went on, and David took Jerusalem and established his throne there. We recall an earlier seminar in which we learned of David's desire to build a temple for God and the promise that God made to him. That promise was that a future son of David would reign from David's throne in Jerusalem forever. It was David's son Solomon that built a magnificent temple in Jerusalem for the worship of God. God gave the plan of the temple to Solomon, and its central feature was a room known as the Holy of Holies. It was here that the Ark of the Covenant was placed. Now the tradition of the Jews is that there was a flat stone on Mount Moriah that was the very same stone on which Abraham laid the sacrifice of Isaac. This large flat stone on the top of the hill formed a natural site for an altar. David was told that sacrifice should be centered there, and so Solomon, under God's guidance, used this exact stone to place the Ark of the Covenant on. The Ark of the Covenant had signified the presence of God with Israel when they came out of Egypt into the land. God was seen in a pillar of cloud or fire centered on the ark. The sighting of the ark on the top of Mount Moriah in the midst of Jerusalem really did mean that God was living in Jerusalem with his people Israel. When they had finished building the temple and were in the process of dedicating it to God, the priests in the temple had to leave because God's glory filled the building. This picture shows the most holy place and an artist's impression of the cloud and fire that signified God's presence there. So Jerusalem was not now just the Jewish capital, but was the city of God himself. The Bible describes how Jerusalem had special significance to God. In Psalm 132, verses 13 and 14, we read, "For the Lord has chosen Zion. He has desired it for his dwelling place. This is my resting place forever. Here I will dwell, for I have desired it." God is saying that just as he had showed himself to be present in Jerusalem when Solomon dedicated the temple, so he would be present in that city forever. And that is a glorious prospect. So, in summary then, we have seen that Jerusalem was a place of religious significance even before the time of Abraham, over 4,000 years ago. That Abraham's faith was tested there. We've seen that God promised David that his son would rule from there forever, and that Mount Moriah provided the site of Solomon's temple. We found out that through either fire or cloud, God showed himself to dwell there, and that he has chosen it to be his dwelling place forever. So that's the early history of Jerusalem. In the next session, we will look at how the Jews regained control of Jerusalem in 1967. Thank you for watching.
Click on the links to view the next video in the series, or to view the other videos in this series. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to our channel and you'll receive details of further videos that will help you in your Bible study. The notes that accompany the series can be accessed from our website.